All right, so this video is going to be about the nitrogen cycle, which is very important because a couple years ago there was a question on the AP exam about bear urine, and bear urine is how bears and all other mammals like us, how we remove excess nitrogen from our bodies. That's what urea is. It's the molecule that our body uses to transport excess nitrogen, which would be toxic, out of our bodies. And so every living organism on the planet has some sort of method to remove excess nitrogen from its body. For mammals, it is urination. For fish, if you have an aquarium or have ever maintained an aquarium, you know that ammonia levels can get a little too high. And that is because fish defecate their excess nitrogen from their bodies, which will cause the ammonia levels, which is NH2, the ammonia levels will get too high and kill the fish. So everybody has some sort of method of removing nitrogen. So even though nitrogen is abundant in the atmosphere, as it says here, the amount of usable nitrogen for life on Earth is limited. Since nitrogen atoms in nitrogen gas are held together by triple covalent bonds, so that is 3 strong bonds, atmospheric nitrogen is difficult for life forms to break apart and use. So the nitrogen cycle is the process via which nitrogen moves from the atmosphere into living things, ultimately back to the atmosphere. If you are an astrophysicist and you're peering off at other planets in the galaxy, chemical traces of nitrogen in the atmosphere might be something you look for when doing that, in that search for extraterrestrial life. Cycles like the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, and the phosphorus cycle are collectively known as the biogeochemical cycles. So that word, biogeochemical, connects biology to geology and to chemistry. So we are all connected. All branches of science are connected. These processes continually cycle elements throughout the Earth. All right, so why is nitrogen so important? So we know we have to get it out of our bodies because it's toxic, but why does it need to be in there in the first place? What is it needed for? So nitrogen is an essential element for the construction of proteins and amino acids. Well, there you go. When we were talking about amino acids earlier, the amine group is an NH2. So we have to have it for proteins. Nitrogen is also an important component of nucleic acids such as DNA, RNA, and ATP. So if you know anything about DNA and RNA, you know that DNA is our blueprint, which makes us. Therefore, one could argue that we would not exist without it. And nitrogen is an essential component of DNA. And ATP, as most of you know, is produced by the powerhouse of the cell. But what does that even really mean? But adenosine triphosphate requires nitrogen. ATP requires nitrogen. Some nitrogen is removed from the air by rainwater. Remember, water is a universal solvent, so the gas dissolved in the rain. The nitrogen in the water can be consumed by nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil that convert the ammonium ions, NH4+. This process is referred to as nitrogen fixation. I have seen questions about this on the AP exam. The ammonium ions can then be absorbed by plants to help make proteins and DNA or RNA. Some ammonium in the soil is also consumed by nitrifying bacteria and converted to nitrite first, then ultimately into nitrate. This process is called nitrification. The nitrates are also absorbed by the plants just as was ammonium ions. Other bacteria called denitrifying bacteria in the soil can also absorb the nitrates and convert them back into oxygen gas and nitrogen gas. These molecules are both returned to the air to be used again. This process is called denitrification. As plants are eaten by animals, the nitrogen travels through the food chain. When all life forms die, the bodies decompose and create ammonia, which is why they stink. The ammonia is converted by bacteria into ammonium to be used again by plants. Bacteria, the conversion is called ammonification. I like these names. Some nitrogen is also released by animals in their urine. It too undergoes ammonification. All right, so all that is shown here in this diagram. So we have nitrogen in the atmosphere. Now we have nitrogen, we have plants that will absorb the nitrogen. But then down deep in the soil, we have nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They live in the roots of this plant. So what is the process called here? Nitrogen fixation. That's why I like these words. They just fit. They make sense. And so then you have your nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria that convert the nitrogen into ammonium. And then you have nitrification that converts the bacteria that converts the ammonium into nitrates. And then you have bacteria that convert it to nitrites to nitrates. And then what could happen is that you could have bacteria that secrete it back as gas into the atmosphere. Or you can have assimilation into plants. So plants can absorb the nitrates. Plants need nitrates to live. So every living organism needs nitrogen. So where do plants get their nitrates, their nitrogen from? They get it from nitrates in the soil, which came from bacteria. All right, and so then one or two things can happen. A mammal can eat the plant, and then the mammal can urinate or eventually die, and then that nitrogen gets put back into the soil. Decomposers can help break down the animal and convert that nitrogen back to ammonium. Decomposers also break down plants. So that is why you need a certain amount of compost in your garden. That's one reason why you need compost in your garden. If you're a gardener, or you will be one day, you need compost for decomposers to break down and form your nitrogen for your plants. All right, and so that is the nitrogen cycle. So the next video will be all about nucleic acids.